All right, I want to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Northern New England chapter of SABR, and tonight's meeting is sure to spark some spirited discussion, and I'm looking for everybody in attendance to get in on the action. But before we get started, I want to just pivot just a moment to my friend Joanne Hulbert, who's going to start us off with a poem. Joanne, you're up.
Okay, this is the most poetical piece of baseball literature ever written. And although it is not in iambic pentameter, but it is close enough to it. And it can be read that way if you so desire. But I'm sure that many of you have heard it, but there is a very good reason for reading it today. Well, two good reasons for reading it today. And this is how it goes. All right. And you will recognize it from the very first phrase. It breaks your heart. It is designed to break your heart. The game begins in the spring when everything else begins again, and it blossoms in the summer, filling the afternoons and evenings. And then, just as soon as the chill rains come, it stops and leaves you to face the fall alone. You count on it, rely on it to buffer the passage of time, to keep the memory of sunshine and high skies alive. And then, just when the days are all twilight, when you need it most, it stops. Today, October 2nd, a Sunday of rain and broken branches and leaf-clogged drains and slick streets, it stopped and summer has gone. Somehow, the summer seemed to slip by faster this time. Maybe it wasn't this summer, but all summers that in this 40th summer slipped by so fast. There comes a time when every summer will have something of autumn about it. That's just the beginning. I urge you to go online. It's very easy to come up with it, to read the rest of it. And I thought it was most apropos for today because today, of course, is October 2nd. And this is a darn good thing to read on October 2. This particular poetic work works very well for Boston right now. So for many, many different reasons, not only for the end of the season, that just wasn't going to be anything good about it at the end, especially, but also because of the tragic death of Tim Wakefield. So bear that in mind also. It sort of all gets bundled up all in that same story.
Glenn Vassy has a comment he'd like to make. Glenn, you can unmute and
yeah, yes, go ahead, have at it.
Unmute, Glenn. You can't be heard right now. There you go.
I would say also, as an Oriole fan, and Brooks Robinson.
Yes, correct. Yes.
His passing during our Boston-Baltimore series.
Mm-hmm.
Has tough weekend for
home.
If only it hung on a couple more days. I know. I thought about that when I heard it. Oh.
Well, let's get started.
Yeah.
The career of Thurman Munson is widely acknowledged to have been a great one. It's also commonly accepted that his life was cut too short by tragedy for him to have been realistically considered as a candidate for the Baseball Hall of Fame. And this evening, we have two very special guests who will be debating Munson's Hall of Fame credentials. First up, I'd like to welcome Dr. Paul Semendinger. I think I got it right, Paul. Dr. Paul is an accomplished writer of novels, children's picture books, and books of motivational passages. His original and unique history of the New York Yankees, The Least Among Them, was published in October 2021. In April of this year, From Compton to the Bronx, the autobiography of Yankee great Roy White, co-written with Dr. Paul, was published as well. In addition to his writing, he is the editor-in-chief of the very popular Yankees blog, Start Spreading the News, and a frequent contributor on the Bronx Beat podcast. Paul, welcome back to Northern New England. How are you?
It's great, Bruce. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to be here. And as I was saying before the show went live, I believe Thurman Munson belongs to the Hall of Fame. I'm not making my case yet, but it's going to be tough because Clayton is a brilliant man. and he's going to be a tough guy to argue against. So even though I believe I'm right and I'm correct in this, I'm worried about the debate because I'm up against it's like I'm going up against, Hank Aaron or Babe Ruth or Willie Mays or something. So it's going to be a tough haul for me here, but I'm up for the task.
Clayton, that was almost an acquiescence right there. I'm not so sure, but his debate partner this evening is the chair of the Gardner-Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont. Dr. Clayton Trutor holds a PhD in U.S. history from Boston College and teaches at Norwich University. He is the author of Loserville, How Professional Sports Remade Atlanta and How Atlanta Remade Professional Sports, as well as the brand new book, Boston Ball, Rick Pitino, Jim Calhoun, Gary Williams, and the Forgotten Cradle of Basketball Coaches. Dr. Trutor was also instrumental in the early stages of organizing this chapter, and we are continuously grateful for his encouragement and input. Clayton, welcome back. How are you, my friend?
Doing great, Bruce. Thanks so much for having me. Thank you, Paul, for doing this as well. I hold Paul in the same esteem in which he holds me. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This has been a meeting that's been highly anticipated for an awfully long time. My email inbox has kind of blown up over it. A lot of people wanted to get in on this tonight to see this. So in thinking about how I wanted this to go, I had sort of an epiphany this afternoon and decided to start like this. What I'd like to do is have each of our participants begin with an opening statement, and then I'm going to turn this meeting over to you, the audience, so that you can ask the questions that our debaters can discuss. At the end of the meeting, we'll try to have a show of hands or come to a consensus on who we think won the debate. Now, there's no prizes for winning this debate. There's no accolades. You just won the debate. I guess that it's a badge of honor you can wear proudly for the next week or two. So let's open it up. Let's start with Dr. Paul. I'm going to go to him, and you're going to open it up with your statements in support of Thurman Munson's candidacy. Paul, you're on.
All right. So I believe that Thurman Munson belongs in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Obviously, I'm arguing in the affirmative. Thurman Munson ranks among the all-time greats as catchers, and his numbers are on par with many of the catchers in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Now, I have a couple of different tabs up on my computer here, but if you look at all of the various JAWS statistics, WAR 7, JAWS, et cetera, it's very clear that of all of the eligible catchers who are not in the Hall of Fame, Thurman Munson ranks the highest. By WAR, Munson ranks as the 15th greatest catcher of all time. WAR 7 moves Munson up to number 8. JAWS says he's 12th. WAR 162 says he's the 9th. WAR puts him at 16th. WAA puts him at 15th. And by MVP share, he's 11th. His OPS plus, even with a shortened career, ranks above Gary Carter, ranks above Bobby Doerr, sorry, Boston fans, ranks above Robin Yount, Ryne Sandberg, many others, including, sorry, Yankee fans, Derek Jeter. The Hall of Fame monitor gives Munson a score of 90, which puts him on the same rank with guys like George Kell, Enos Slaughter, Tony Lazzari, and Lou Boudreau. But of course, Munson played a harder position. He was a catcher. He played virtually every game. He played the majority of the games by and large every single year throughout his whole career until his final season, when, of course, his year was cut short by his tragic death. Bill James, in his wonderful book, now Bill James argues against Thurman Munson, and that's where this whole debate really began, with an online discussion with Bill James, and Bruce offered to have me debate Bill James. Bill James didn't take up the offer. But in his book, The Politics of Glory, he gives the Keltner list. And I won't read the entire Keltner list. It's 15 questions. But if you go through the Keltner list, the answer for almost every single one of those issues is yes, it's in the affirmative. Does Thurman Munson belong in the Hall of Fame? You look at each of those categories, and he does. And you know what? Here's my the greatest pitch here. We talk about the character clause in the Hall of Fame. And Thurman Munson, of course, you know, he was at MVP votes in 7 of the years of his career. He won an MVP. He was the Rookie of the Year. He was the leader on the Yankees. He was the first captain since Lou Gehrig. There was always the story that the Yankees would never have another captain until they named Thurman Munson the captain. And when somebody asked George Steinbrenner about it, he goes, you know, if Lou Gehrig were alive, the person he would have wanted to be the next captain would have been Thurman Munson. He was highly regarded by his peers. He was highly regarded by his teammates. He was the second greatest catcher in baseball in the 1970s, behind only Johnny Bench. And like I was saying before, catchers are underrepresented in the Hall of Fame. And he was one of the greatest catchers of all time. But here's the grand slam last point I'm going to make. We talk about the character clause a lot, and we talk about guys who had great character. Thurman Munson's career was cut short because he died in a tragic plane crash. His numbers would have been even better had he continued to play. I know people say he was declining, but there is the position of DH, and he could have put up numbers as a DH for many years, and he probably would have left the Yankees and played for Cleveland because it was closer to his home. And when we talk about the character clause, the reason he died, let's not forget this, is because he was flying an airplane. And why did he buy an airplane? Why did he buy a jet? So that whenever he wasn't playing, he could go home and be with his family. That's what he was. He was a family man who wanted to be with his wife, and he wanted to be with his kids, and he wanted to be dad. And he was getting dissatisfied with New York because it was too far away. So he died in pursuit of the most noble of efforts, the most noble of things to do, trying to be dad while he's being a Major League Baseball player. His numbers speak to his career, his success. He was the heart and soul of the Yankees when they won all those World Series. They went in 76 and they won in 77 and 78. And he was also a great family man. And his impact on the team was such that after he died in 1979, the Yankees didn't make it to the World Series again for a generation until the 1990s and 1996. And so I'll close my opening argument with that.
Clayton, Paul's come to play.
No doubt about it. That makes a fantastic case.
You're on.
Okay.
Let's have Clayton open up his argument against Thurman Munson and his inclusion in the Hall of Fame. Go for it.
I agree with Paul completely. Thurman Munson was an excellent baseball player, the captain and backbone of the great Yankees teams of the 1970s. He was there for the good and he was there for the bad. The Yankees have honored him in countless ways, and deservedly so. His name and legacy are etched in the hearts of Yankees fans. There will never be a serious Yankee fan who doesn't know about number 15. But that doesn't make him a Baseball Hall of Famer. Here are 4 reasons why he doesn't belong in Cooperstown. First of all, Munson lacks the long-term statistical benchmarks of a Hall of Famer. His modest totals in every major offensive category are well short of Hall of Fame standards, even for a player at the most difficult defensive position. For those concerned with WAR and other such statistical chicanery, Munson needs to get in line behind Wally Shang and Gene Tennis. As a catcher, Munson had a stellar arm. He won 3 Gold Gloves and called a great game by all accounts. But so did Lance Parrish, who appeared in more All-Star games, won as many Gold Gloves, and won 6 Silver Slugger awards. I don't recall his name recently coming up in any such Hall of Fame conversations. Despite Munson's Hall of Fame skills, he is no Brooks Robinson or Ozzie Smith, both of whom were the most accomplished and dazzling defenders at their positions for more than a decade. Munson's defensive prowess is insufficiently extraordinary to overcome his career offensive totals. Even if you play the what might have been game with Munson, he was by all accounts a deeply physically compromised player at age 32, despite making ever more appearances at other positions to protect his body. The idea that his 701 career RBIs would suddenly pop into 4 figures, or his home run total would jump much beyond 113, or that his career hit total would increase from 1,558 to something resembling Ted Simmons' 2,472 doesn't ring true. My colleague Paul writes for the Great Yankees blog Start Spreading the News, an homage to Frank Sinatra. In keeping with the Sinatra theme, Munson's Hall of Fame prospects are not a case of the best has yet to come. They are more a story of the world we knew. Secondly, Munson was not dominant enough during his peak era to make up for his short career. Paul laid out Munson's impressive run in the mid-1970s, but make no mistake, this is not the stuff of a Cooperstown plaque. This is not Sandy Koufax with his 3 Cy Youngs, 4 no-hitters, and 5 straight ERA crowns. This is not Ralph Kiner winning the home run title 7 consecutive seasons. This is not Roy Campanella with his 3 MVPs for the Dodgers after an already storied career in the Negro Leagues. Think quickly about the best players of the 1970s. Reggie Jackson, Johnny Bench, Pete Rose, Willie Stargell, Yaz, Morgan, McCovey, Schmidt. And that's leaving out pitchers. Is Munson in the top 10? Is he in the top 20? Where would you put him? He certainly didn't define an era in the way that Campanella or Koufax did, despite their brief careers. Thirdly, Munson isn't even first in line among former Yankees who belong in the Hall of Fame. I'd put these 5 Yankees in ahead of him. First of all, Greg Nettles, who hit almost 400 home runs and was as impressive a third baseman as Munson was a catcher, and he's a mile ahead of Munson on WAR. Secondly, Elston Howard, the first African-American in Yankees history, a 9-time All-Star and MVP. He has 4 World Series rings. He won 2 Gold Gloves. He missed 2 seasons in his peak because of military service. He's one of the Yankees' great ambassadors and also the inventor of the baseball bat donut. His cultural significance and on-field performance are both greater than that of Munson. Thirdly, Don Mattingly. Mattingly was arguably baseball's best player in the second half of the 1980s, and statistically provably its best gate attraction. He won 9 Gold Gloves, he won an MVP, all in a similarly brief career. Tommy John won nearly 300 games and was the test case for the surgery that revolutionized baseball. And finally, my pet project, Roger Maris. Roger Maris is essential to any telling of the history of baseball. He had a similarly short career to Munson with much more significant high points. In addition to 61, he had his 2 MVPs, and he was a key contributor to baseball's best team of the early 1960s, the Yankees, and baseball's best team of the late 1960s, the Cardinals. Finally, Munson's Hall of Fame candidacy was never in hiding. He's playing in the biggest market in the most high-profile team in baseball. His name comes on the ballot in 1981, just 2 years after his death, with sentiment on his side. He got just 15% of the vote. 15% of the vote. Beyond that, he barely hung on the ballot. If you looked at Munson's resume, or took Paul's case for Munson and changed the proper noun New York every time to Milwaukee or San Diego, would there even be a chance of his induction? Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.
Wow. They've come to debate tonight, ladies and gentlemen. That when I tell you that was impressive, I don't even know as if there is a stronger word for that. So I'm just going to acquiesce here, and I'm going to go to the audience. Jeff Cohen, you had your hand up first. It is so good to see you tonight, Jeff. You're on.
Thank you, Bruce, and thanks, Paul, Clayton. I agree with everything you said. I don't know. I'm glad. I guess I'm glad I don't have a vote because this is very difficult. All I know is, as a Mets fan, in the 70s, I want Thurman Munson to be my catcher no matter what. But I've been looking here, and there's a couple of statistics, defensive statistics that never come up, and I want to get your take on it. He led the league in innings caught 4 times in the 70s, and he also led the league in complete games caught, and that goes to, with the pitcher. Being able to take the pitcher through a complete game, not like we have today, but back in the 70s, he led the league in complete games caught, and I think that's a very impressive stat. What do you guys think?
I would have to know a little bit more about it contextually to have an opinion. I don't know what percentage of games were completely caught during that era. Is it radically different than other starting catchers? So it sounds impressive, but I would have to know a little more to have an opinion on it.
I would like to say that he did play. Like I made that point. He was a guy, catchers usually don't play a lot of games. He played 140, 147, 144, 157, 152, 149, and 154 during the heart of his career. He was a gamer. He was the heart and soul of the Yankees as the Yankees climbed from obscurity in the early 70s, obviously, back to the glory days. So I think that's also reflected in the fact that while his overall numbers in any season were not seen as great, he received MVP awards. He played only 11 seasons, one of them being 1969 when he only appeared in 26 games. He won MVP votes in 7 of his 10 seasons, and then take out the 1979 season. So basically, the only 2 seasons he didn't receive MVP votes by the writers was 1971 and 72. Every other season of his career, he was considered one of the players in baseball who was worthy of the MVP. He got votes by the baseball writers all those years. I would argue that his career is short, yes, but baseball has made that accommodation time and time again for other players who aren't Roy Campanella and Sandy Koufax. In fact, one of the reasons I think Tony Oliva just got in is the argument of, well, if he had had better knees, Herbie Puckett had a short career, and that's been explained away by his physical ailments. Fred McGriff, people who voted him in, and they said if there hadn't been a strike, Fred McGriff would have hit 500 home runs. You can't use that standard for some players and then not use it for others who are Hall of Fame worthy. And I believe Thurman Munson is Hall of Fame worthy, and his numbers would have been better. I agree with Clayton. They might not have been appreciably better, but his WAR numbers and numbers like that would have gone up, obviously, if he had had a couple more years. And everybody likes to say he was on the decline, but we've all seen players on the decline come back later in their career and have better seasons. And again, he could have been a DH playing for Cleveland, and that might have revitalized his career to some extent.
Before I go, just to let everybody know, and I put this in the chat, there's a website, munsonhof.com, that has a lot of the statistics and great analysis, if anybody wants to check that out. Thank you, Bruce.
I'd like to say about the
Thank you.
MVP thing.
Oh, go ahead.
I'd like to say about the MVP thing, contextually, I have the same question about that. How common was that? How many players received at least a piece of a Hall of Fame vote or of an MVP vote during that era? Did many other players who are not in the Hall of Fame also receive that? So I'd like to know a little more contextually about that aspect of the evidence. And I think also fundamentally, a lot of the case for Munson is built around borderline Hall of Famers. That, well, he's slightly better than this guy who's in. Just because there have been some people let in where it's questionable, to me, does not make the case for Munson. I don't think you improve the Hall of Fame by letting somebody in who may also be a borderline candidate simply because other candidates who are questionable have been allowed in.
Good stuff. Let's move on to our next participant. Susan Nelson has had her hand up for a while. Susan, you're on.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, great arguments. My question, I have 2 questions. One is, why would Thurman Munson be considered for the Hall of Fame over other players who also had shortened careers due to less dramatic circumstances? And the second question is, why hasn't Munson received hardly any support from the baseball writers in getting elected?
I'll go there. There is the feeling that there's a pro-Yankee bias for getting into the Hall of Fame and winning major awards. That's, again, Clayton likes to say, I'd like to see the evidence. Throughout my life as a Yankee fan, I've seen lots of Yankees not get awards. Ron Guidry in 1978 could have been the MVP, probably should have been the MVP. The Yankees are the team that went to the World Series, won the American League. He was 25-3. The award went to Jim Rice. In 86, a lot of people thought Don Mattingly should be the MVP. That year, the reverse happened. It went to a pitcher on the Red Sox, Roger Clemens. Derek Jeter had an MVP year. Justin Morneau instead won the award. Hideki Matsui had a Rookie of the Year type of season. That year, they said, oh, if you came from Japan, that doesn't count. You're not really a rookie, even though Ichiro got it. And after Matsui, other players from Japan won the Rookie of the Year award. There have been times when the supposed Yankees get a bonus has actually hurt Yankees players. Andy Pettitte could have been the Cy Young Award 1 year, and I think Pat Henkin won it with lower numbers. I mean, I'm just rattling these off the top of my head. But the argument that he wouldn't have made the World Series if he played in a different city could be true. But on the other hand, as Susan asked, are other Hall of Fame borderline guys in who had similarly short careers? Yeah, Kirby Puckett's one of them. So, it's Thurman Munson died. His career was cut short. even with the truncated career, I think he put up enough numbers. And I think those numbers I said at the beginning, like WAR and things like that, put him among catchers in the Hall of Fame. It's hard to say that the 15th best catcher in the history of the game isn't Hall of Fame worthy.
Good point so far. Let's go to Walt. Walt Cherniak, you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I agree with Clayton. I would add Willie Randolph to his list as more deserving of the Hall of Fame than Thurman Munson as well. And I agree 100% that if Thurman Munson had spent his entire career with someone other than the Yankees, this conversation would not be occurring. You mentioned the shortened career as if it's a plus. It's actually a minus. 10 years is the minimum to be eligible for the Hall of Fame. The fact that some people with short careers have been enshrined, possibly they deserved it, possibly they didn't. I always go back to something Bill James. I mean, Politics of Glory is one of the great baseball books ever written, and he makes a point in there fairly early where he says first thing he says is when people ask me if someone meets Hall of Fame standards, his first answer is, how the hell would I know? Nobody agrees on what they are. But beyond that, Bill James says one of the worst arguments for a player for the Hall of Fame is that he's better than the worst person who's already in. I saw all of Munson's career. He was a great player. I just don't think his career was long enough. And I don't think he gets extra points for what he might have done or for being a great family guy. It was very tragic how he died, but we can only look at what he actually did in baseball, not what he might have done. I'll admit I was with Clayton before you both talked, but I'm even more with him now.
What say you, fellas?
Clayton, you want to go?
I would say that I think one thing Walt brought up that I certainly agree with is the idea that you can't decide someone's a Hall of Famer simply because Harold Baines is in there. Not to call him out too much, but
correct. And I'm not going to disagree with that as a point. But again, you look at WAR. That's considering guys who had long careers, short careers, any careers. He's the 15th greatest catcher of all time. There is a site. Let me see. Let me give credit where credit is due. I believe Pinstripe Alley actually compares when they wrote this article. I have to get the date here. In 2021, June 22nd, 2021. You put Munson against a guy like Buster Posey, who most people say is an absolute guaranteed Hall of Famer. Munson played more games. Munson had a higher WAR. Munson had a higher peak WAR. Munson had more hits. Posey had more home runs. Munson had more RBIs. They each had an MVP. They each had 2 top 10 finishes. They each won a Rookie of the Year. Munson won 3 Gold Gloves. Posey won 1. Posey had 3 World Series rings. Munson had 2. Munson had 7 All-Star nods. Posey had 6. If you're going to say Buster Posey's an absolute, no doubt about it, Hall of Famer, Munson ranks as good or better than him in virtually every single category.
I'm not saying that, though. I have questions about Posey, too.
Oh, there you go. Okay, well, that's fair then.
There we go. Okay. This is great so far. I am going to one of our newest guests this evening. She is next. Her name is Anna Stamanamu. How did I do? I did it.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. Anna is not a SABR member, and that's okay. I want to make sure that everyone knows, whether you're here in the room tonight or watching on YouTube, all baseball fans are welcome at any of our meetings. If you see our meetings on Facebook, Twitter, or whatever, and you would like to join, please do so. And Anna is here tonight because of the Facebook algorithm, I hear. Isn't that right?
That's right.
We will have to connect online so that I can show you how you can be a member of SABR too. But Anna, there you go. All right. I like it already. Anna, you're up. Go ahead, my friend.
All right. Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. I actually do enjoy these panel discussions, and I'm so glad I saw this on Thurman Munson. I'm going to be the one to, stir the pot a little bit, because I agree with Paul. I obviously did not grow up in the Thurman Munson era. However, I've worked with several people that have known Thurman and have spoke very highly of him, and like would recreate like his plays, and I would just imagine it in my mind and just believe that I'm there watching him. So it's incredible. Now I get this whole irony of like analytics and watching baseball games now, and people going off on analytics saying, oh, but we can't rely too much on it because baseball is full of heart and you got to go with your gut to play the game. But it's really ironic that the players that are doing the game and are relying on analytics, we have to now look at analytics for Baseball Hall of Fame. Like, wherever happened to empathy and compassion and even the nobleism that Thurman Munson emulated? And, I think based on some YouTube interviews I've seen, he had a reputation for being so honest, for being straightforward, and even well respected with other players that perhaps he didn't get along with, but was actually, how do I say, like, he was that type of leader that no matter what, he'll get along with you. And I think my simple question would be, like, are there any special moments, perhaps, or performances by Munson during his career that truly stand out to anyone who's actually a fan? Maybe this, Dr. I'm not gonna ruin your last
Paul,
name,
just
but
say Paul.
Okay. Honestly, maybe you can emphasize more on how Munson, during his career, what stands out to you most in wanting to support him? Because personally, for me, I think he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Not only, I'm not even thinking about stats, because I already know the stats and everything. I've heard it 2 million times. But I will say that while Clayton does pose a very amazing argument, why are we relying so much on numbers? But what about the grit and the heart behind the game? Thank you.
Oh, that's just a fabulous question. Clayton, I'll have you
Two
go
things.
first.
Anna, thanks. Anna, two things. Thanks for your comment. First of all, I would say we rely on numbers because numbers are a common language for comparing players across era. It's really all we have to have a sense of how one player from the 1970s compares to a player from the 2020s versus the 1920s. Secondly, in terms of empathy and the human side of it, I think the Yankees are the proper location for the honoring of him in that respect. And the Yankees have honored him in profound ways over the past 4 decades and should continue to do so as long as they're the New York Yankees. I have no question of his significance to that organization, and I'm so glad they've honored him in countless ways. But whether or not he should have a plaque that belongs alongside Ted Williams and Hank Aaron and everybody else, that's a different question.
I will give these numbers about grit. In the 1976 World Series, Thurman Munson hit .529. I think Sparky Anderson, the manager of the Reds, said something like he is the guy who we have to watch out the most for. He was a lifetime .357 hitter in the postseason. He hit a huge home run against the Royals when the Yankees were making their drive for the pennant in '76, hitting it well into over 400 feet in the old, or the new old, Yankee Stadium, when people didn't hit the ball out into the bullpen. Thurman Munson's big home run changed that series. He was a clutch competitor. He was a clutch ball player in every sense of the word. We talk about short careers, and people, like to mention certain players. I'm going to tell you about a guy who had only 5 good years: 1932, 1933, 1934, 1935, and 1936. He had 5 good years. He was 18 and 15. He was 20 and 18. He was 30 and 7. He was 28 and 12. He was 24 and 13. And besides those couple of years, he was an average pitcher. And nobody is saying Dizzy Dean doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. Dizzy Dean's career was short. He got injured, but it was short. He wasn't that good. He was, except for those couple of years. And Munson was a great player for those numbers of years. In fact, when he was playing, I remember the Yankees saying things like, nobody hits 300 and drives in 100 runs. That in the mid-70s was a big deal. Munson did that 3 consecutive seasons. Nobody was doing it back then. He also batted third on a team. And the other part about grit, the Yankees in the 60s were terrible. Munson comes along in 1970, wins the Rookie of the Year. The Yankees, I believe, finished in second place in 1970. And they were a top usually in the top 3 or 4 of all the teams throughout the first half of the 1970s. People remember it's the dark years. The Yankees were actually ascending. Is it a coincidence that the Yankees ascended as Thurman Munson arrived on the scene? I don't think so. I think the reason the Yankees ascended was because Thurman Munson was such a great ball player and he meant that much to the team and the franchise.
I'll tell you, this has been a spirited debate so far. I want to go to Sean Moore, who is next in line. Sean, my friend, you're up. How you doing?
Good, and thank you for hosting this as always. And yeah, so 2 comments. So both Paul, Clayton made excellent arguments. I spend way too much time on Facebook baseball pages and stuff, and I think I've heard all those arguments before, pro and con for Thurman, except for the one where Clayton pointed out there's 5, 6, 7 Yankees that should be in the Hall of Fame before Thurman Munson. And I agree with every one of his choices. And I've never heard that argument before. And it's very compelling. So as far as the debate's concerned, I'm going to give it to Clayton. But for that one contribution. But I also want to point out too, this is something that's always bugged me about Thurman Munson. So he's the team captain, right? And he started playing with the Yankees, I don't know, about 1970 or so. And yeah, they were good, but they didn't win any World Series until, Reggie Jackson came to the team in 1977. I'm sorry, Thurman Munson's the team captain. He said a lot of bad things about Reggie Jackson. And it's like, you're the team captain. You should be like, this guy is going to help us win. And you know what? He did. The Yankees won the series in 77, 78. Because of Reggie Jackson. I mean, he was the the straw that stirred the drink, or whatever you want to say. And there's something about Munson's, to me, it just always bugged me. Munson's the captain. He should be pulling for these people. New teammates like Reggie Jackson. And Reggie Jackson was never happy about that. And I don't blame him, So to me, that's always been a black mark about Thurman Munson. I said it.
I think that's fair, but the history I remember was that Thurman was very welcoming to Reggie Jackson. And then what happens in the 1977 spring training is Reggie Jackson sits down and does an interview for Sport Magazine, says it's off the record. Then he says he's quoted wrong. Somebody said, how could you be quoted wrong for 5 pages? But his basic comment in that article was, I'm the straw that stirs the drink. Now, remember, the Yankees had been to the World Series the year before. Thurman can only stir it bad. The bad blood was not started by Thurman Munson. And I don't recall any quotes Thurman said about Reggie. I think Reggie said the things about Thurman. Thurman might not have then said, hey, I love Reggie Jackson. But Reggie, of course, again, was quoted in Sport Magazine saying Thurman can only stir the drink bad. I'm the straw that stirs the drink. Right as it came to the Yankees. And I'm a big Reggie guy. I loved Reggie. Reggie's the reason I became, in many ways, a big Yankee fan. But I think the record is that Reggie was the guy who said the bad things. It wasn't Thurman.
Sean, thanks for your kind words. First of all, in terms of Reggie, I think that goes to one of the points I made in terms of, if you're talking about the essential players of the 1970s, Reggie Jackson is among a handful of them. I would in fact say probably the most significant baseball player of the 1970s. I don't think you put Munson on the list of the handful of elite players of the decade. If you're telling the story of baseball in the 1970s, he's part of the story, but his name is not in bold in the way Reggie Jackson or Johnny Bench or Mike Schmidt or Willie Stargell is.
Great. Thank you.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Ben Abel, all the way from Vancouver, British Columbia. Doggone it, it's about time I saw you, my friend. How you doing?
Pretty good.
I
Yeah,
just
I
want to
had
say that whatever Ben says, I agree with, because I think his background with Batman and Robin is the coolest of anybody's. So
I agree
Thanks,
with it because
Paul.
he comes from the greatest North American city.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, Clayton, as well. Thank you so much. It is a great city. Well, my question to both of you, I just had dropped something in the chat, but I think you guys have both presented compelling arguments. I don't really follow the Yankees of the 70s. It's not really my thing. But what I wanted to ask, and I put it in the chat, and Bruce had asked me to ask, was what is the benchmark then for Hall of Famers? Because nobody can agree. Because if you compare someone like Posey to Munson, and Posey has more championships, I know obviously baseball is a team game, but somebody who has a World Series championship more than one other guy, to me, kind of, gets in, or to me is a better candidate, winning more championships. So I want your guys' opinion on my question about what's the benchmark then for candidates.
Ben, I think the best part of the Hall of Fame is that it's a subjective enterprise, and lots of people can bring different insights into why someone belongs in the Hall of Fame. I think the benchmark is that you can get 75% of very thoughtful, informed people about the history of baseball to think that you belong in its most hallowed halls. I think having such a large college of cardinals, basically, of electing the leader, electing people to the Baseball Hall of Fame, is in itself the benchmark. That you have a lot of people bringing different biases, different institutional histories together. I think bringing all of that together and having someone need to achieve that point of getting 75% is itself the benchmark. I'm going to have different criteria than you, who's going to have different criteria than Paul and the other people in here. I think that's part of what's great about it, is bringing all of this knowledge and memory together.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
I think that's the fun, right? Like, at the end of the day, whether Thurman Munson gets in the Hall of Fame or belongs in the Hall of Fame, I think, there's an old saying that once we stop talking about people, then they don't exist anymore. And there's, in the military, you always say the names of people. I think at Arlington, they have like the wreath ceremony at during the holidays. And when you put the wreath on each of the graves, you say the person's name, and that keeps them alive for another year, because their name gets said over and over again. And I think that's part of what we're doing here, is we're keeping the memory of a great baseball player alive. Overall, the fun is that he's a borderline candidate. So you can make compelling arguments why he doesn't belong, as Clayton has done. And you can make, I hope, compelling arguments why he does belong, I think, as I've done. I hope I've done that. But in the end of the day, that's the fun. If it was absolutely black and white, we wouldn't have anything to talk about. And the fun is talking baseball and saying, yeah, Thurman Munson was better than Lance Parrish, or he was better than Ted Simmons. He was better than Carlton Fisk. And somebody saying, no way, Fisk was better, and this is why. And then somebody else saying, no, Munson was better, and this is why, etc. That's to me, that's the fun of the sport.
The Baseball Hall of Fame is great for the same reason college football used to be great. When they just had a poll, it was an argument. Oh, is the Pac-10 better than the Big Ten, better than the SEC? It was all just debate and subjectivity, as opposed to now they ruin it by settling it on the field.
Love it. Love it. Donna Muscarella, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I am so happy to see you tonight. I'm doing great. And you are up next. What is your question for our debaters this evening?
Well, I want to specifically address Clayton's argument that if Thurman hadn't played in New York, we wouldn't be having this debate, because we don't know that. We don't know what kind of an impact Thurman would have had on any other team he played with. That's the kind of player he was. He elevated those around him. So to say that he would have been less than someplace else, you don't know. Everybody else may have been more than, and the spotlight may have been shining just as brightly. Did it not shine on Rod Carew? Did it not shine on oh boy.
How about Ted Simmons?
George Brett.
Tony Gwynn.
Yeah.
George Brett played in Kansas
George Brett,
City,
yeah.
small market team. You're going to tell me that, oh, well, whatever, you get my point. So, and part two, just to address some things that some other people have been saying about things people said about Thurman. I've had the tremendous privilege to speak firsthand with some of Thurman's teammates, and not a bad word. And some of them have said they wouldn't have necessarily been the players they were had Thurman not been with them. So I will remute myself and let you guys go at it.
Don,
That's
I'd like to respectfully disagree on the Munson getting the level of consideration he does if he was somewhere else. Gene Tennis does not get this consideration. Lance Parrish does not get this consideration. Those guys won World Series rings. Those guys have potentially compelling cases too, and we're not debating their Hall of Fame candidacies tonight. We're debating Thurman Munson's, in large part because he was a player on the most successful and prominent franchise in the history of pro sports, in the biggest, most significant city in the world. Well, it's not the biggest city in the world, but the most significant one.
Paul, did you have a rebuttal?
I'll just say this. Bill James put this book out. This all came out before war, right? It's called Win Shares. And in that book, he lists the greatest players by decade. And Thurman Munson's, if you just look at the 70s, ranks right up there. And he's now, I'll argue against my case. There's other players who aren't in the Hall of Fame who also were great in the 70s who rank above Munson. But as far as in the 1970s, Munson ranks above Steve Carlton. We're talking about pitchers. Mike Schmidt, Burt Blyleven, Lou Brock. He played the entire decade. Don Sutton, Carlton Fisk, Nolan Ryan. I'm just quickly looking at guys who are in the Hall of Fame, who also played in the 70s with Thurman Munson. My point is, if you look at the great players, and Bill James likes to say he doesn't belong, but he ranks him right up there with his numbers that are, supposedly, based upon a variety of different categories and things, that he was one of the better players of the 1970s. And to the point that Clayton made, which I'm not going to disagree, that Greg Nettles, I have a picture of him right here. He's right behind me. He was my favorite player. Reggie's 3 home runs is what clinched the deal for me being a Yankee fan. I loved Reggie, but Nettles was my guy. I want Nettles in the Hall of Fame. I want Tommy John in the Hall of Fame. I think Munson's case is better than Mattingly's and Maris's. I forget the other. Willie Randolph, I think, belongs.
Tommy John was the other
Tommy
guy.
John belongs in the Hall of Fame. Absolutely, positively. But just to say that these guys aren't in, so Thurman doesn't go in, I don't buy that. I think any one of them could be the first of a group of guys who all played in New York and who haven't gotten the proper recognition, even though they played in New York, for the Hall of Fame.
Once they're all in, he's got my vote. It's going to be a very long ceremony if we get them all in the same afternoon.
Let's do that. Would be awesome. I would love that. Let's call it Yankee Day.
I think I have to build a new specific interstate to Cooperstown for
yes, for just for that Hall of Fame. That'd be awesome.
Mike, I'm gonna hold you for just a minute. Glenn Vassy has been kind of doing this for a while now, and I got to get him in here because he's got something to ask. Glenn, you've been chomping at the bit. Go.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not as tech savvy. I couldn't find the raise my hand.
Just go, ooh, ooh, ooh. That's what I do.
But at any rate, call on me. But at any rate, a couple of points I want to make. One is, when I was researching an essay on Eddie Murray's career, I ran into a wonderful quote that was, and I forget the source of it, but it was, there are some players who are honored by their Hall of Fame election, and there are other players who honor the Hall of Fame by being elected. So you take a Brooks Robinson, for instance, and if he was not in the Hall of Fame, the Hall of Fame would be a travesty, and it would demean the Hall of Fame if he had not been elected. So obviously, we're talking about one of those players that would be honored by, rather than, because if there's a debate about whether they belong, obviously that's the category they go into. And as we were saying, that's the fun part. The fun part is having the debate. And it winds up keying on emotional issues quite frequently. When I was 13 years old, I was at a baseball game in Memorial Stadium in Baltimore. It was the first game I'd ever gone to without an adult. The Orioles were starting a 4-game series against the Yankees. The Yankees were 4 games behind the Orioles. It was 1970, August. And the feeling in the stadium was whoever won that first game was going to win all 4. And we're going to also win the next 3 games in New York that were happening the following week and take the division. That was the feeling. throughout the stadium. Everybody I talked to felt that way. And that was the first time I'd ever seen Thurman Munson play. He got involved in a play at the plate early in the game. My hero, Frank Robinson, coming around from second, trying to score, close play at the plate, bang, bang play. Frank got called out. Munson had evidently tagged him, but Frank argued. And Frank very rarely argued when he wasn't sure he was right. Slapped my friend. I said, he got hit with a pitch to get it on base. Then he gets called out at the plate. He'll hit 2 home runs. Watch. Frank hit 2 home runs, but the game went back and forth. Finally, at the end of the game, the Orioles are down 8-6 going into the bottom of the 9th. Frank leads off, hits his second home run. It's 8-7. They load the bases. Lindy McDaniel comes in to pitch. You remember Lindy? At any rate, he comes in to pitch, throws 8 consecutive strikes that if you swung at him, you were going to miss. If you didn't swing at him, they were going to be called a strike. So there's nothing you could do. He was just on that year. And finally, I forget who was batting, swings and just rolls this little dribbler out towards the second baseman. And it looks like the game's going to be over, but somehow or another, it eludes everyone. And the runner on second, I think it was Davy Johnson, decided he was going to score no matter what. So the tying run had already scored. Davy Johnson's barreling around third base and coming to home plate. The play comes, Munson lays the tag down and gets knocked on his derriere and is laying in the dirt with his face down in the dirt. Davy Johnson jumps up. The umpire calls him safe. The Orioles win the game. He's running off the field, and he suddenly realizes that Munson's still laying in the dirt back there. He goes running back to see if Munson's okay. Munson just raises his hand, his face still in the dirt, and waves him away. The trainer and the manager come out from the Yankee dugout. Munson takes his other hand, waves them away. I sat there with my friend and watched for 10 minutes before Munson got up. And I said to myself, that's a guy who cared about this game. Struck me tremendously. Fast forward a few years, I'm in New York, living there. Munson passes away. Who are the Yankees playing that night?
Yeah, the Orioles.
Came back, Baltimore Orioles. I have a boss who has season tickets. He gives me the tickets. I go to the game, start getting harassed on the subway because I'm wearing an Oriole hat. Somebody else slaps the guy and says, he's got an armband on, leave him alone. Went to that game. I have never been in an event that had such an emotional impact on 50,000 people. They announced that they were going to have a moment of silence, and there was a moment of silence. And then this wailing started. After the wailing had gone on for several minutes, the announcer over the PA said, okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to play ball. The wailing got louder. 5 minutes later, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to play ball. The wailing got louder. It took a while before that stadium settled down and they played a baseball game. During that time, I had my binoculars and I was looking in the Yankee dugout. Everybody in that dugout was solemn except for Mr. Reggie Jackson. Reggie Jackson couldn't sit still. He was wandering around all over. He's trying to talk to people who were ignoring him. That kind of upset me. But at any rate, that's my contribution to the story. I don't know whether any of that means the man belongs in the Hall of Fame. I don't know whether it doesn't mean he belongs in the Hall of Fame. But in terms of having an impact from the field into the stands, Munson was one of those players. I will say that.
Fabulous.
Beautiful story. Yeah, great.
Absolutely. Beautiful
Thank you.
story. Yeah.
my old friend Mike Whiteman. Mike, how you doing?
Bruce, I'm great. How are you?
I am great. I'm so happy to see you and have you here tonight. You've got a question for our guys. You're on.
I do. And I'm going to just tip my hand here and say, I'm kind of on the side here of Thurman. I am sold on Thurman in the Hall of Fame. When you look at his cumulative WAR, he's 15th among all catchers. And when you break down the rates, like WAR for 7 years, WAR for 166, he's actually in the top 10. So I'm sold. And so I'm already there. Appreciate both Clayton and Paul. And thank you for the intelligent conversation. Clayton, I argue with Paul a decent bit about things. And so you have a worthy adversary per se. Question. Well, and one more thing, Clayton. Really appreciate the Roger Maris for Hall of Fame. I really think Roger does not get enough consideration. I did a little blog thing about him recently. But Clayton, my question for you is, are there any catchers who are not in the Hall of Fame right now who you think should be in the Hall of Fame?
I haven't thought about it closely enough to have an informed opinion on it. I mean, I think you can make a very strong case for Lance Parrish. I think he has a superior case to Munson. I think Gene Tennis does as well. I don't know. I haven't thought about it enough to have an informed opinion. I would say about the WAR thing, though, if WAR is the be-all, end-all, why have all these conversations? If it's just a spreadsheet, then let the spreadsheet do the work. What we're doing is taking that and deciding what it means. So I don't think WAR or any other particular statistic is the magic bullet for Hall of Fame induction.
Paul?
Yeah, I won't disagree with that. I don't think WAR is the magic bullet number for Hall of Fame induction, just as much as the fact that Munson had only 113 home runs or 701 RBIs. Right? You can't say numbers don't matter, but these numbers do matter. And as Mike noted, and Mike does write for Start Spreading the News, and he is a friend of mine. But so for all clarity and upfront honesty and all that kind of stuff. But then if you look at the deeper numbers, we're not just saying WAR, we're saying WAR 7, JAWS, WAR 162, WAR, WAA, MVP shares. We're looking at the gray numbers on the Hall of Fame monitor, the Hall of Fame standards. We're looking at OPS plus. We're not just looking at a number, we're looking at a conglomerate of lots of numbers, and including things that like win shares. He ranks in the 70s, now above, Carlton Fisk.
But all of those numbers do the exact same thing. Every one of those. The point of those numbers is to tell you that the conventional baseball numbers you've known forever don't mean anything, that this is what really means something. They're a way to try to outsmart what everybody who's always watched baseball knows. So he may have a great rankings on a lot of these numbers, but I think collectively they all serve the same purpose. So to me, every one of those rankings of non-conventional statistics is basically saying the exact same thing. They're all one number in my mind.
All right, so then we can go to the new Bill James historical asterisk, where Bill James says Thurman Munson's. I'm sorry.
I called him the Robert McNamara of baseball in print, so I'm hardly his biggest fan.
David J. Gordon states in Baseball Generations that Munson, who he ranks as the 14th greatest catcher of all time, belongs in the Hall of Fame. In the Cooperstown Casebook, Jay Jaffe ranks Munson as the 12th greatest catcher. He says the short careers guy, he is Hall of Fame worthy. Again, I mentioned the Keltner list, which is 15 different standards. We could go through that. I don't think we want to, but I think we can make an argument that on most of those 15, Thurman Munson meets those criteria. So I don't think we're looking at a statistic. I think we're looking at lots of statistics, and we're looking at MVP votes. We're looking at Gold Gloves. We're looking at World Series appearances, and we're looking at the fact that he was a leader. We're looking at the fact that the Yankees won while he was there. And Donna made a point, and I thought about this when Donna was making her point. The argument that if he played in Milwaukee, maybe he doesn't get the Hall of Fame discussion. People wouldn't be talking about him. Maybe if he plays in Milwaukee, the Brewers were and also ran in a lot of those seasons. Maybe he's the difference. The Orioles were great in the first half of the 70s, and they weren't as great in the second half of the 70s. Maybe the Orioles have an unbelievable decade. They made it to the World Series again in 79. Maybe if Thurman Munson was their catcher instead of Rick Dempsey, who couldn't beat out Thurman Munson to be the Yankees catcher. Maybe if the Orioles had Thurman Munson, they would have won more World Series. Maybe if the Red Sox had Thurman Munson, but they wouldn't have fallen a game or two short in a couple of those years. Maybe they would have beaten the Red Sox in 76 or 75, excuse me. So the argument that if he wasn't a Yankee, he wouldn't get any consideration, wouldn't be talking about him. If he wasn't a Yankee, he might have been the difference on those teams that made them winners, and then he would be part of the conversation.
That might be the case, but one thing we know for a fact, if you play for the Yankees, every baseball fan knows who you are. If you're a starting player for the Yankees, whether it hurts you, whether it helps you with MVP voting, you are a known commodity to every baseball fan in a way you aren't if you're a starter for the Brewers or the Padres or the Texas Rangers. You are the centerpiece of the story of baseball. So the story of Thurman Munson sneaks up on absolutely no one.
Right.
I've got 3 more in line. Walt, you have something real quick. So, Walt, I'm going to...
Yeah, really quick. Just really quick. We should discuss Bill Freehan in this conversation. Because Bill Freehan is a very good example of a guy who had a career similar to, I think his WAR total is maybe 2 wins below Munson. And if Munson was the best catcher of the 70s, there's no question that Bill Freehan was the best catcher of the 60s. He won a championship, won Gold Gloves, All-Star appearances. You never hear his name in conversations like this. So when we're talking about guys, somebody asked about catchers that aren't in the Hall of Fame, besides Munson, that perhaps we should think about. I would argue that in addition to tennis, Freehan should be discussed as well.
That was actually I was actually going to propose a debate of Bill Freehan's credentials coming up. So Walt, you took the words right out of my mouth. Good stuff there. I'm going to flip back to my line to Molly. Molly, you're up. You have a question for our debaters this evening.
It's kind of springboarding off what Anna said earlier about not necessarily looking at the statistics, but looking at the person as a whole. Now, Roberto Clemente was inducted after he died, and very quickly after he died as well. And I'm thinking about the fact that his legacy is very much both baseball and being a humanitarian. And I was wondering what type of humanitarian acts or things of service to the community Thurman Munson did. Out to both of you.
I don't know enough to have an informed opinion.
To be honest, I don't have an answer to that as well. I think Roberto Clemente sets a bar that's probably impossible for most baseball players in history to attain. His Hall of Fame election, after his death was very well deserved, obviously. I don't think Thurman Munson, and I'm his proponent here, I don't think he has a record of anything near what Roberto Clemente did as far as humanitarian stuff, especially outside of, like I said in the beginning, like maybe being, a great dad, wanting to be with his family, that kind of thing. That's again why he bought an airplane in the first place. But
I think for the average New Yorker, there was an aspect of Munson where he just seemed like an average blue-collar guy. He was a very relatable character for a lot of people. I think Billy Martin kind of had that quality too. I sort of see like that's part of the appeal of that team, that the average person, the everyday person could go out and see themselves on the field, that they're going out, they're busting their butt every day. And they could see this in a public sphere kind of manifesting itself. That's the player on the diamond that they could relate to. And I think the emotional appeal Munson has to a great extent is that he's very much a blue collar guy in the way the people in the stands are watching him.
I'd agree.
Gary, you're up. You're muted, my friend. You've got to unmute yourself. Gary is talking into the ether and he needs to unmute his microphone. I'm going to skip Gary and go to Ryan, and then we're going to come back to Gary. Ryan, you're up.
Hi, guys. Thank you. So those 61 Yankees in the Hall of Fame and 45 of those are players. Does that have any effect on Thurman Munson not getting in? There may be too many Yankees.
I don't think there's too many Yankees. They're the greatest franchise in the history of pro sports. The Hall of Fame should be full of Yankees. If there were 100 Yankees, I wouldn't have a problem with it.
I'm a big Yankee fan. I agree. I think you have to just judge each player for whether they deserve it or not. And I don't think you could say there's too many of this or not enough of that as a way to say a worthy player, just because he was a Yankee, doesn't deserve to go in because there's too many Yankees, or an unworthy player deserves to go in just because he wasn't a New York Yankee. I think you have to judge each player on his merits. But I will say, if you look at that list of 61 Yankees who are in the Hall of Fame, it's somewhat of a dubious list because a lot of those guys, Paul Wainer was a Yankee for like 10 seconds. Stan Koveski was a Yankee for about 42 seconds. Ivan Rodriguez was a Yankee for 14 minutes.
You were helping me with Immaculate Grid for tomorrow. Thank you.
Yeah, Jim Cobb was a Yankee. Gaylord Perry was a Yankee. I mean, there's a lot of guys who are in the Hall of Fame as Yankees. The Yankees get to claim them, but they weren't Yankees, right? They were Yankees for just a brief, shiny moment at one point in their career, and then the Yankees get to claim them. But they didn't really make their Hall of Fame case in New York with the Yankees. They just happened to be there. Frank Chance, Thinkers Tevers to Chance, he's in the Hall of Fame because he's a Cub. But he was a Yankee for a minute, and he was a Yankee manager for a minute as well. So,
Gary, how's that mic working?
Sure.
There he is.
Yeah, I'm back. Anyway, I'm glad I didn't have to follow Glenn's story about being in Yankee Stadium after Thurman Munson died. That would have been too much. And I first of all, I want to thank Clayton and Paul. This has been a lot of fun. And I don't want to be the skunk at the wedding, but my question sort of goes to a couple of places. It's not really a question either, but Clayton had talked about the Hall of Fame's one of its great strengths, and the reason that we pay attention to it, to the extent that we pay attention to it, is that it's much like the College of Cardinals, where you have like lots and lots of people who are knowledgeable and interested, who you need 3/4 of those people to get in. Well, that's great, except lots and lots of people who are in the Hall of Fame, that's not how they got in. They got in by way of committees who are made up of Hall of Fame guys, owners, general managers, a whole bunch of people, but not anywhere near the hundreds and hundreds that would be in any way comparable to the College of Cardinals. Lots of them get in because guys on the committee are their friends. And which ties into another thing. When we talk about why not so much voting support by the writers for Thurman Munson or let's say Roger Maris, and I think the answer to that is they're kind of known as surly guys. They were not, they were not Reggie Jackson. They were not the guys that were always there available for interviews. They were not the guys that were big on self-promotion. And I think writers are human beings the same way that most players are human beings. They don't get along with somebody, they don't like them, they make their job, if the player makes the writer's job harder by not talking to them, when it comes to voting for a marginal guy, why should I vote for this guy? This guy never helped me, why should I help him? So I think that's about the other thing too, is that there's no such thing as alternative history. There's only one history. I mean, it's not, we're not living in a multi-dimensional universe in terms of things that might actually happen or could have happened. We just have what happened. So, whether Munson would have been better or worse, or Milwaukee would have been better or worse than when, I don't get it. And frankly, it seems kind of pointless to me. But anyway, that's about it. Otherwise, I will be the skunk at the wedding. So
You're not the skunk at the wedding. You make great points.
He does make great points. He's not the skunk at the wedding. I don't think I've ever been to a wedding where there was a skunk, to be quite honest. But
that's because
they usually get weeded out by not getting invited.
There it is.
Oh, but I will say, for all those who think Roger Maris should be in the Hall of Fame, oh, God bless you. If there's a mortal sin that we can attach to anybody who has anything to do with the Hall of Fame, that's the mortal sin. The fact
Gary,
that Maris is not there.
Gary, you take the words out of my mouth with that. If I could wave my magic wand and put one person in, he would be the man. I would say, Gary, also, I'm a skeptic of the Veterans Committee, this kind of after the fact trying to solve things. I'm all for having ad hoc committees. Obviously, with like the Negro Leagues, those players were not considered, they were discriminated against.
Right.
You need a committee specifically for that purpose. Early African-American players also discriminated against. Have an ad hoc committee for that. But having these permanent committees to add new Hall of Famers, I think lends itself to the problems you suggest. And while the system isn't perfect, as you point out, I think we have a good system, and I think frequently the perfect is the enemy of the good.
Right. Well, one thing we have to remember is that the Hall of Fame is its own entity, and part of its mandate is to make sure it continues itself. And the only way that happens is if we have new guys all the time, because somebody who's 15 years old or 20 years old or 40 years old, for that matter, has no idea who Thurman Munson is, or who Roger Maris is, or who anybody who played before the 1980s is. And unless you get new Hall of Fame members all the time, nobody who's beginning to be interested in baseball would care a fig about the Hall of Fame. They want to see guys in the Hall of Fame that they saw play. So, we're always going to have new guys, and there's always going to be somebody who's the worst guy in the Hall of Fame. And the guys that get in, like it or not, are going to be guys that he's better than the worst guy. There's always going to be those guys. So, and I think the Hall of Fame is deeply flawed, but you're right. It's the one we've got. I mean, we're not going to wake up tomorrow and there's going to be a new Hall of Fame, and all the dead guys are going to move over to the new one. And, they're where they are, and they're going to stay there. So that's it. I'm done.
all right, last one for the night is Alex Stace, who believes that Dave Roberts should have been called out in Game 4 of the 2004 playoffs. I'm dismayed at that remark, but I'm going to let him ask his question anyway. Alec, it's real nice to see you. How are you?
Well, longtime Yankee fan. That was my adolescence. I love that team, but I would say, question is for this group, when Thurman Munson was the MVP, because that's been brought up a few times tonight, and I know that team quite well. How do you think he ranked in terms of wins above average on his own team that year?
I'll jump right in on that because, again, Greg Nettles was my favorite player growing up, and Greg Nettles twice in the 1970s led the American League in WAR for position players, including in 1976. And Greg Nettles, I was so thrilled when Scott Rowland got in the Hall of Fame this year, because now Greg Nettles is the same argument with Thurman Munson in many regards, the highest ranking player by WAR of third baseman in baseball history who's not in the Hall of Fame. So I think Rowland dessert getting in helps Nettles. And yeah, Nettles had a higher WAR in 1976 than Thurman Munson.
There were also three other guys.
Was there really? I didn't know that. I was just focusing on Nettles.
Three other guys who are black, and I would just point out to this group that I think that when we talk about Billy Martin or Thurman Munson being like the regular people and stuff like that, that's not. I mean, I would say that this was part of an era of blacks. I mean, we talked about the Negro Leagues before. We said blacks were obviously discriminated against, but there was still a discrimination there was in the 70s, and anyway, Munson benefited from that perception. But I would say, I mean, a longtime Yankee fan, but he's not, to me, in the same category. And I popped in the chat like the most similar scores, and none of those people, with the exception of Posey that was mentioned, were even close to being Hall of Famers. So he's a Yankee Hall of Famer. That's a different category for me.
I agree completely with your point, Alex, in terms of the dynamics with Martin and Munson. That's pointed out very well in Jonathan Mahler's "The Bronx is Burning." I think that's a great point.
All right, let's go to each of our debaters for a quick wrap up and closing argument of their positions. Clayton, I'll go to you. Let's have you wrap up your position quick, and then we'll flip it over to Paul.
Thurman Munson is a great player who is uniquely significant to Yankees history, but he's not a baseball Hall of Famer. Whether one looks at his career statistics, his significance in his particular era, him related to other potential Yankee Hall of Famers, or the notoriety he had simply by being a Yankee, collectively, he doesn't add up to being a baseball Hall of Famer. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, everyone, for listening.
Paul?
All right, so I just want to say thank you to everyone for being part of this. This was a great deal of fun. Again, Thurman Munson's a borderline Hall of Famer, no doubt about that. But is he a Hall of Famer? Again, to me, no doubt about that. He ranks among the greatest catchers of all time in any of the categories that we went through a million different times tonight. It's hard to say that the player doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame when he ranks at or with so many other players who are in the Hall of Fame, especially when he played a very tough position as, like we said, being a catcher. He also was a leader on the Yankee team that went from the depths of bad to the heights of greatness again. And he was the leader on that team. So if he had a rock solid, no doubt about it case, that's great. Then we wouldn't be having the debate and he'd already be there. But the fact that he has a borderline case, again, makes for a great debate and a great discussion. And I just want to again thank Bruce for making this happen. I want to thank everybody for participating. I want to thank Clayton because, as I suspected, he was an absolutely phenomenal person to debate against because he's just brilliant, and he made it very hard for me to try to win the argument. I hope I did. And I hope maybe Clayton says, yeah, you won, because probably Clayton won the argument, but I still think Thurman Munson belongs in the Hall of Fame. So it's all good. Thank you. This was fun.
If you think that Thurman Munson should be in the Hall of Fame, I'm going to count it up now. Give me a raise of a hand. Let me see. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I count 5 with a raised hand. I think the winner of our debate based on and Paul would be 6. So I think the winner of our debate is going to be Clayton this evening with the argument that Thurman Munson does not belong in the Hall of Fame. Clayton, good for you. Paul, good for you. This has been fantastic. I am so thrilled with the way this turned out, and I'm so happy everybody could be here tonight. The next week, Tuesday, not Monday, Tuesday, October 10th, former Intercounty Baseball League star and author Paul Allen has a new book called Bright Lights, Black Stars, and it covers the Negro League players who came to play in Canada's oldest baseball league. This is sure to be a fascinating presentation on some baseball history that's not talked about all that often, and I hope you're going to join us. 7 o'clock, Tuesday night, October 10th. Hope you're going to be there. Paul, Clayton, thank you so much for doing this. Go.
I'd like to say quickly, when Munson was on the ballot, 15% was his highest. Paul got him up to 25%. I think Paul wins.
Oh,
you didn't count the abstentions either.
That's right.
This has been fantastic. Hey, let's get everybody out of here. I know Paul's got another podcast to do in about a half an hour, so he's got to get moving too. So let's wrap it up. Everybody have a good night. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.